Welcome to the Executive Real Estate Investing Show. This podcast is for you, the busy business owner or executive looking to create generational wealth. Here, we're going to show you how to do that through real estate investing, from multifamily to industrial and everything in between. You will become a real estate investing expert. And now, here's your host, Michael Holman.
Welcome to another episode of the Executive Real Estate Investing Show. Got another fun episode for you today. We're going to be drawing all over this beautiful glass because today we are going to show you how a 1031 exchange can be a part of a syndication and how specifically that is structured. So if you have a 1031 exchange, you've done a 1031 exchange, and you've been told, no, you cannot invest in a syndication, I'm here to tell you it is possible, and I'm going to show you exactly how that is done in the most stringent ways. But to start, as always, we're going to start with the executive tip. The executive tip for today is, as a business owner, as a business executive, you need to learn to deal with the failures. We love the successes. We want to celebrate the successes. But there will be failures, and you cannot let that get you down. You have to pivot, and you have to keep moving on. So make sure you understand how to deal with the failures, how to move on. It's to a point, I mean, to be honest, I think I've failed so many times in so many ways, I don't even recognize failure. But like I said, for you and your situation, figure it out. We're going to go ahead and get right into this episode. This is going to be great. As always, though, if you haven't checked out the website, go check it out right now. Press pause on your podcast, press pause on YouTube, go to www.executivereishow.com. From there, if you think you can add value as a guest, you can be a guest, you can ask an executive question, you can leave a review, you can subscribe, all of the good things. And we have podcasts, blogs, all sorts of things on the website. So executivereishow.com. Go check it out. Go leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so we're going to get right into this. So as I said, we're going to talk about 1031 exchanges today, okay? And specifically, we're going to talk about how to get those into a syndication deal, okay? Don't get me wrong, it's tricky, it takes some effort, and it takes a little bit more legal understanding than maybe your average syndicator has, but it is absolutely possible. It's just a little bit of work, but if you know how to do it and you know how to structure it, it's going to be a beautiful thing. So we are going to start, and I'm going to draw an org chart on here because that's really where I think the easiest place to start to be able to understand how this looks and what this looks like, right? Like I said, you can do it. It is 100% possible. And if you are listening to this on the podcast, it's still going to be good, but go check it out on the YouTube site. This is one where we're going to be drawing all over this board. I'm going to do my best to make sure I'm explaining everything as I go. So if you are listening to the podcast, you still get all the value, but like I said, it's visually, it makes a lot more sense when I'm up here drawing all of this on the board. So what we're going to start with, there's a couple keys when you're doing a 1031 exchange, okay? When you're doing the 1031 exchange, along with all of the basic rules, right, that any exchanger or title company is usually familiar with. Most real estate agents are familiar with these, right? The identification period, the period to close, all of that. I'm not going to get into any of that in this episode. But what I am going to get into is there's a couple of nuances and how this relates to syndications, right? So the important thing when you're doing a 1031 exchange into a syndication is that you have to invest in real estate, right? Well, you're saying, well, no, duh, right? I mean, I invest in real estate through syndications all of the time. Why are you over here starring this and making it look all important? Well, the reason being is because when you do a normal syndication deal, right, you're not necessarily investing, right? So right here, you have a normal syndication deal. Okay, let's look at this. Normally, you're not investing directly into the real estate, okay? You are, don't let me confuse you, it's going into the real estate, you're getting all of the benefits of real estate, okay? But this is important when you're doing 1031 exchanges. What's important to know is when you're investing through a syndication, you're investing in an LLC that's investing in real estate. Okay? Generally, that LLC is what's known as an SPE, or a special purpose entity, meaning that LLC has one purpose. That one purpose is to invest in that one property, that one development deal, that one piece of real estate. All right, so you're getting all, as the owner, the syndication investors, you're getting all the benefit that comes from the real estate, but the way that it's structured is through an LLC. Well, how does this present a problem? The problem for 1031 exchanges when you're doing a syndication is that a 1031 exchange cannot invest in an LLC. Okay? If you do that, your 1031 exchange becomes void, right? It means you can't do it. You get audited, the IRS is going to come out and say, you cannot do that. You can't invest. You have to invest in real estate. You invested in a company, in a business. Therefore, your 1031 exchange is void. Okay? And we don't want that to ever happen, especially if you have a big giant 1031, right? You could owe hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in taxes, right? So there's the dilemma here, right? All these syndications go through LLCs to invest in real estate, but yet a 1031 exchange, you can't do that. You have to invest directly in the real estate. Well, how do you get your 1031 exchange people not to go into the LLC, but to go directly in the real estate? Well, let's structure that so that you guys can see it visually on what is happening here, okay? So to start off, we're gonna come here and we're gonna say right here, this little box right here, okay? This is the property. So what I'm saying, this is the actual real estate. Okay? This is the real estate. This is the piece of land. This is the building. This is the apartment complex. This is the storage unit, the office building, whatever it is, this is the actual real property. Okay? That's the beginning of our org chart. Well, in a syndication, you have your LLC. And like I said, that's generally an SPE. So if you have your LLC, okay, that is generally what's investing into the real estate right there. Well, let's say you have a 1031 exchange investor that you want to include in there. Well, a 1031 exchange investor, they have to go in there. They're what's called a TIC or a TIC owner. Okay, so they have to invest directly in the real estate. They can't invest in the LLC. So what you have to do is you have to carve off a little tiny piece of this real estate, and you have to let that 1031 exchange investor invest in that TIC owner. And you can do this with an infinite number of 1031 exchanges, right? It can happen as many times as you want. Usually the number here is more limited by your lender than it is by anything else. So there's kind of the basic structure, right? You have real estate, and these 1031 exchanges are coming in and investing alongside the LLC. All of these three together, okay, they're what's called the co-owners. Okay, so these entities, the TIC owners or the 1031 exchanges, along with the LLC, they are what's called the co-owners of the property, of that real estate. So this is generally what's happening. Okay, but now how does this all work? All right, so I'm going to erase this, and we're going to go over more in detail on what that structure necessarily has to look like for the lender to get in line with this. So once again, we're going to come here. This is the real estate. So just like before, this is the actual property, whatever it may be. Might be land, might be a multifamily property, an office building, retail, doesn't matter. There's the real estate. Well, what's going to come in here, just like normal, you're going to have the LLC. So there's the LLC. Well, what the lender really wants and really is going to require, they don't want to have to deal with every single 1031 every single time they need to do loan documents, every single time they need signatures for everything. That becomes really cumbersome for the lender. And they want to avoid that. They don't want to be bogged down and risk a 1031 exchange investor disrupting the whole deal. Because usually this LLC will own something like 50, 60, 90%. And this is the person that they're dealing with, right? This is the sponsor and the syndicator. This is the one working with the lender. This is the person they want to deal with. Well, how on earth then do you have all these people who own the real estate become a part of that and not have to sign on everything, not have to do everything? Well, here's how. Okay, we're going to create, so all of these TICs, or these TIC owners, are going to create what's called an SPE. So you're going to have this TIC owner that creates this SPE. And let's say this is another TIC owner. They're going to create a different SPE. Well, what are the requirements generally for these SPEs? Well, these SPEs, or special purpose entities, they have to house only that TIC investment. So this could be say $1 million, this TIC could be $2 million, and this TIC could be $5 million. That SPE is housing that $5 million investment and nothing else. The only purpose of that entity that has to be created by the TIC owner is to house that investment. Well, what you then do in order to make this work for the lender is you make the manager of those entities, right? You make a manager managed, and the manager is usually required to be the sponsor. And that's the case with all of them, right? So you do manager managed, and the sponsor is the manager, and so on and so forth. All right, so now what you've created is a situation that works for everybody. You have the real estate that you're invested in. You have the LLC, which houses the sponsor, which controls the deal. Right? They're the one that put the whole thing together. And you're able to get all of these investors in passively through a 1031 exchange. I mean, it happens all the time, right? Someone's dealing with a rental house and they're tired of fixing toilets. They sell the house, and what happens? They want to go invest passively in a syndication. Great move. I see it all the time. Well, here's how you can do it, right? You just create the SPE. You house the TIC in there. The manager becomes the sponsor. Now they're passive. Now the manager can then have the right to go sign all the documents that need to sign, because all these people are still on the documents, right? These entities are still on the documents. But what's happened is through the creation of that, you've given the sponsor the ability to sign on behalf of that entity. It's the same thing as you might have a founder of a company and a CEO of a company who didn't start it, but the CEO has the power and authority to sign on behalf of that company. Same exact thing. That's exactly what we're doing here. So there is the basic structure on how we're going to tie this all together. How did the 1031s get in there? Now it's a little cumbersome. To be honest, if you're doing a 1031 exchange into a syndication, there's some more work for you. You're going to have to deal with a few things that you wouldn't normally have to if you were just investing like normal into the LLC, because you're going to have to create the SPE. Right? Maybe the sponsor is going to help you, maybe not, but you are going to have to create the SPE. You're going to have to create everything that surrounds that, right? You're going to have to create a tax ID number. You're going to have to create an operating agreement. You're going to have to ensure that everything is checked by the lender and up to their standards. So there is more work. Don't get me wrong. This is a passive investment, but it's more work up front than it is otherwise. But it's possible, right? You can get in there. You have to set up the work right at the beginning, and as long as you are going with a sponsor and a lender who knows and is familiar with these, it's fairly painless, right? And if you don't know how to create an entity, you don't have to do any of that, you might be spending $500,000, $1,000 to have an attorney create all those things for you, right? But if you have a $1, $2, $5 million 1031 exchange, to spend $1,000 to get out of fixing toilets all of the time, to me that's a bargain. I would happily pay someone $1,000 to not be called at 2 a.m. in the morning to go change a light bulb or fix toilets, right? So that's the way that I look at that and that I view it. So there's the basic structure. Now, one of the questions is, how are these people treated then? Well, the interesting thing is all of these groups, right? Everyone here, the LLC and all of the TICs, they're bound together by a TIC agreement. So that stands for a tenant in common agreement. That means that it's basically the agreement that all of these parties, all of the co-owners, agree to be bound by. And the interesting thing is, if you set this up right, the LLC has an operating agreement. If you've invested in a syndication before, you understand this. You've had to sign the operating agreement, or you've seen the operating agreement, you've read the operating agreement. Well, what generally happens with this kind of investment is the TIC agreement will mirror the operating agreement. So all of these TIC owners are being treated just like all the investors in the LLC. Pretty awesome. But like I said, you can see it's a little more work. And if you don't know what you're doing, all of a sudden it starts getting a little hairy when you're trying to talk to a lender, and if they don't understand, and you get a title company involved who doesn't really understand, and the sponsor doesn't really know what they're doing, you're gonna fumble your way through this. It's gonna take 20 times longer than it needs to. And it's gonna be extremely difficult if you even get the deal done. But like I said, this is possible, and it happens all of the time, right? You can see how this is structured. So let's go back, and again, I want to talk about how these TICs, how they function, right? Because we kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I think it's worth going into some more detail here. So you generally, in these deals, you're going to have certain investors, right? You're going to have your GP, who is the sponsor. That's the developer, that's the sponsor who's putting together the real estate project. You're gonna have your LPs, and those are your passive investors. I'm invested as a passive investor in a bunch of stuff. A lot of people are. This is what that is, right? So the LP, and these are all related to the LLC. And then you have the TICs, or the 1031 exchange, and they're kind of out here all on their own. Well, if this is set up right, kind of like I was talking about before, all of these, they have a lot of upfront work. There's no getting around it. You're gonna have a lot of work to do. It's gonna be a little bit of a headache at first. Happens all the time, especially if you're not familiar with these. But the beautiful part about this is you have all of this upfront work, and as soon as you get past all of that and you're closing on loans, you then become a passive investor as well. And that's a beautiful thing. So this, right, these two groups, the LLC and the TIC, those two, like I said earlier, are bound by the TIC agreement. So hopefully you can kind of see how this is all coming into play here. That's how you get the TICs, in these 1031 exchange investors, into the deal. They can be a part of it. They can be a passive investor. Like I said, you got to understand it does take upfront work. You have to know that going into it. And it's a little bit messy, right? I mean, we do development deals all of the time. And so what happens with our TICs is they have to come in for the value of the land, which is great, but then they're getting a percentage based on the land value. Well, the total project value is not what the cost of the land is. So their percentages end up having to change throughout the project. And you gotta do some paperwork in order to change all of those, right? So you might have land worth $4 million. You did a 1031 exchange. You're a TIC owner into a syndication project. You had $2 million that you brought in. You might own 50% of the land, but eventually when they go to close on the loan, all of that's going to get switched, and your $2 million isn't going to be representative of 2 divided by 4. It's going to be represented by 2 million divided by whatever the total project cost is, whether that's 40, 50, 60 million. So your ownership, your percentage is actually going to change throughout the process, and that's okay. That's nothing to be alarmed by, but when you come in early on, you're going in for the land, that's how you get in. Along the process, we have to switch it because all of a sudden now it's not just the land, we're going into the full project. Really exciting stuff, and like I said, honestly, you can do this. It does require some work up front, but it is 100%, no questions asked, possible. Usually what ends up happening is a sponsor will try this once or twice, they'll deal with $50,000 more in attorney's costs, have a huge headache, they'll get delayed by a bunch, and they'll say, I'm never doing that again. And that's okay, right? This isn't for every sponsor, but it can work really well if you so choose. So whether you're interested in active investing, or if you have a 1031 exchange that you're interested in passively investing, either way, this is really, really valuable information for you. So that wraps up this episode of the Executive Real Estate Investing Show. Like I said, if you listen to this whole podcast, highly recommend go back, watch the YouTube video. It's going to make a lot of sense as you, well, maybe not that much sense as you see my chicken scratch across this glass, but it'll help make a lot of sense here so that you can see visually what is going on. And as always, if you haven't checked out the website, executivereishow.com. It's awesome. It's great. It's got a lot of resources. Also, please, please, please go leave us a review. Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever you listen to the podcast on, please go leave us a review and a rating. We'd really appreciate it, especially if you're liking the show. We're always open to hear what you're thinking, what you're hearing out there. And make sure you go in, like I said, executivereishow.com. Love to either have you on the show if you're interested, or if you just want to ask an executive question. I'll answer it personally here on the show. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to the Executive Real Estate Investing Show. Ready to learn more? Go to executivereishow.com for more episodes and resources to help you create generational wealth through real estate investing. That's executivereishow.com.